tonight's talk, tonight's healing session is entitled Lexicon of the Universe. And I realize that with all the work on the list of all the people who are here tonight, many of you have been with me for some time, and we've been going deeply, every time deeper and deeper, every time deeper layers of experience and understanding and healing come out of these sessions. And we've gotten familiar with all the aspects of creation and all the layers of our own consciousness that we're utilizing, and looked at different ways of activating or enlivening our own healing potential. But what I realized was we need to go deeper now into the way in which each one of us personally interacts with that field of consciousness and with that field of pure being, so that ultimately I feel as if what we're looking for and what energy healing is aiming at is to kind of create a meta system for dealing with problems. Because people often come to energy healing because they've got something. You know, either there's a physical illness that they want to deal with, or they want to heal, or there's a situation they want to deal with. This is what brings a person in the first place. But what we're really looking at in terms of, if we look at all the different modalities or ways in which energy healing affects positive change for people, is we're really looking at more universal principles of how we deal with problems. So it's not just finding the solution to a particular problem, which also we want to do, but it's finding the solution to all problems. And it's not to say, and this is, or I should say, I don't want to downplay or not give sufficient reverence to the simple act of transcending the relative, because that incredible gift, that incredible capability, that incredible experience that's beyond all other experiences is, of course, foundational to everything. But we are here because even with that tremendous potential available and accessible, what seems to have come up now after decades and decades, many of us have been on this path for decades, we've had access to the field of pure being, is that it's not just the direct experience, it's what each individual intelligence and creativity does with that, what being does with it through these physiologies. The physiology is the instrument, the unit. It is the principle. It is the point of reference. And each person has their own unique point of reference. And because of that, each person has their own unique set of beliefs and understandings about the nature of creation. And that's going to be different for each one of us. Each one will be collectively, we have a kind of collective agreement about a lot of things. And if we look at society as a society, we have a kind of collective agreement about a lot of basic principles on which society functions. Each person has to be trained to get along in society at an early age. This is just the way it is. And we learn the rules. But within each family, there is a much more complex, refined set of rules. That, well, when I'm interacting with this person, I know they have a sensitivity on this spot, so I have to be a certain way. And when I interact with this person, I know they have a different sensitivity, so I have to interact that way. So when we get into more intimate spaces, we have more elaborate belief systems or more elaborate codes of conduct and understandings. And just on that note, I would like to, for example, give the example that when I was a young girl, my family had a circle of friends, and the circle of friends were kind of like a family. It was a very intimate circle of friends, and everybody knew each other very well. And there was a sweet young couple there, I think in their 20s or maybe early 30s, and they ended up divorcing. And in this divorce process, it was felt that the lady felt that the husband was being abusive. But shortly thereafter, the husband married another lady that was in the group. And it's interesting, or maybe a year later, it wasn't that he was cheating, but it was interesting that the relationship was so different. The second marriage was so very, very different from the first marriage. And for me, there was a big lesson. I think for everyone, there was a big lesson in that, because the same man was reacting abusively to one woman, but to the other woman, he was very, very respectful. And whereas the same woman was treated very respectfully by everyone, the first woman, both women were treated respectfully by the group. But just in that one relationship, it didn't work. So, what that means is that these sets of codes, or these forms of communication, they're very complex, and there's a lot of detail there. And with each person, it's going to be slightly different. So my role, or my job tonight, is to be as clear and open a field of what I know to be truth as I possibly can. And it is my intention in that each person gets the truth each of you get the truth that you need tonight in tonight's session, because it's going to be a little different. Everybody has slightly different needs, and that's okay. That's a good thing. Okay. So when we're talking about communication, we basically have two different areas that we're dealing with. We have truth or information, content, you could say content, and delivery. Content and delivery. So on both of those accounts, one needs to attend. So I thought we would look at them one at a time. And also, of course, this is a good point when we brought up our 2 points, to go into the group and see what we need to do for all of us, where we are as a group and where we are with the collective. One of the things that's happening in the collective right now is that there's been a shift of one of the big planets, Saturn, which was moving from a kind of a dark, dense, cold, sort of austere place into a bright, open, fiery, warm place, and then turned around on April 5th and is moving back into the cold, dark, dense, kind of mysterious, reserved place. And it's only for a few months. It's only for, I don't know, a couple months till June or something. But it's such a huge body. It's such a huge body that move is affecting everyone on Earth. So I just wanted to add in this principle that a lot of the sort of overarching feelings that are coming up are a byproduct of experiences of the entire collective. And what I'm inferring from that is that as we are going down into deeper, more delicate, refined, like the real detailed rules of functioning and communication, because of course when we go from a family which is more detailed than the society, then of course from there we go into our own inner space. And this is what we're doing tonight, is we're looking at the communication with the deep within the inner space of consciousness, and what are the rules of appropriate social interaction and how do we position ourselves so that we can make maximum use of the potential of consciousness. So it's interesting, at the same time we're going in deeper, we're also taking into consideration that which is further out. And this is part of the fractal in nature of consciousness, that we're really dealing with something big. We're dealing with a meta system for dealing with all problems, but we're doing it by going into detail and looking at just points, little areas, and handling it from the small area. It's like the accessible area. Okay, looking into the group. Okay, so the first thing that I'm seeing in this live webinar healing session is there seems to be an awakening of the Anya chakra. And I know we've done a lot of work with the Anya chakra before, but here we are again. And evidently for the group and for tonight's healing, this is necessary. So I just trust if that's what I'm seeing. And what I am seeing here in the Anya chakra is a beautiful, like a divine form of orderliness. Orderliness is here. And it's orderliness that has a fractal in nature. So it's activation and awakening. We could say an awakening of a subtle form of consciousness from the collective level of the physiology or the collective level of consciousness. And it has a very sort of light, angelic quality to it. And it's reminding me very much of the shape of a crystal. And crystals are so beautiful because, you know, on the outside they have those nice facets, but inside the molecules line up with facets too. And we've got a quality of consciousness that's that orderly. But of course, because it's manifesting from the collective level of being, the orderliness goes all the way to infinity in all directions, you know, from very, very fine to very, very gross or very, very great. It's orderly all the way up. It's reflecting its own nature all the way up. And there's a lot of silence in this intelligence. There's also a kind of a stable sense of progress and peace. It is like a scaffolding on which great systems are built. And it is I'm looking at it, first I'm analyzing it just as it is. I'm seeing it and just analyzing it as it is. And now I'm looking at a little denser level of analyzation, which is that it's part of a collective of nature which has to do with structuring or building. So the archives of information connected to and associated with structure are also present and lively. And I'm seeing it sitting in a kind of a two-dimensional shape right inside, deep within the center of the brain. But I'm also seeing what looked like two-dimensional was the top, and then it creates a cone shape going down into the brainstem and into the, you know, these deep inner brain areas, particularly that wonderful and all-important substantia nigra ventral tegmental area of the brainstem area. And that is, it's like a key that opens a door. And the door that's opening is the door to the flow of pure being or pure divinity. So it's opening resonating, it looks like a resonant space deep within the head, which allows the resonation of pure silence. Pure silence. And it's not just pure silence, it's silence with the presence of divinity. Presence of divinity. So the being of silence. And that has many names, has its Sanskrit names. And as I'm looking in to the point of contact, and the point, it's like a kind of a vortex shape like that. The point of contact is actually a little bit deeper in. It's behind the eyes, it's behind the sinuses. It comes down into a secondary chakra that's in the mouth. So think of it way, way at the back of just behind the throat area. Mm, And it's feeding that silence, that pure being, the being of pure, infinite, unbounded silence. It's coming down now into the throat area. This is so important. This is such an important healing for all of us. Somebody cares that you hear well. This is where you can't get away with anything. This area, the energy in this area, you can't get away with anything. Everything you eat, whether somebody sees you or not, this sees you. And the thyroid, it knows. And this is where we reveal truth, our truth to ourselves. This center of speech is the place where you can't hide. You can't hide. The nature of this part of the body is, even if you try to hide, the eyes are a little bit like that too. They can't, they're too deeply connected to the truth of creation to be able to utterly hide the truth, unless you're some kind of master actor or something like that. And even then, you're using the potential in this area to express. So whatever passion is present in the self, it sits here in this area. And what I'm watching in this healing is the way in which being is connecting the means by which we process information with the means by which we express information. So there are two different channels for processing, right? There's the low road channel where the experience that comes in goes up into the limbic system and it's kind of processed very quickly, and the result is some kind of emotional reaction to experience, to life experience. And then there's the high road area that comes up through the prefrontal cortex, where one analyzes and synthesizes the life experience and can kind of unpack those emotional packages and understand it in terms of information. And then this is where it gets expressed. What we're talking about tonight is, how do we express? How do we interact? What do we give from our side that produces the response at the powerful, subtle, all-knowing levels of being that will breed success? One time I was speaking to a group, and one man asked me, "Do you still suffer?" That was a really thoughtful question. And I realized the answer is yes, I still have stuff happen, but I respond to it completely differently from the way I did before. Looking into the group and seeing the adjustments coming through. We're clearing memory patterns and habits. There are habits of responding in a way which elicits a kind of like a fractal response. They're habits of responding to certain input that are self-sabotaging or self-destructive. And these habits, they're triggered by certain kinds of input from the environment, which is challenging. like my friend, this man asking me, do you still suffer? You know, the answer is yes, but the habits that would take that suffering and amplify it into a bigger suffering have been burnt up. They've been dissolved. And so that's what we're doing. That's what we're getting at right now, is how do we dissolve those triggers, the triggered reaction in the physiology. And that's at one level deeper. A lot of that's at the heart level, because the heart, all this potential and capacity to feel in the heart area is what speaks up into that limbic system. And when the limbic system loops right into the throat and then speaks, and you find yourself speaking directly from some intense level of emotion, oh, that's a good chance to make some mistakes and things to get worse. So that's a loop. There's a loop right there that we're like a vicious cycle that we need to unpack that thing and get everything in order so that, thank you, I see it happening, so that the process of unpacking the emotions is the first habit that comes in when a difficult or challenging situation is faced. The first step is to unpack those emotions and get them into a condition where they're just pieces of information. They're bits of information, bits of truth. Then however they're expressed is going to be very not only helpful and supportive to you for like really deeply understanding what you're experiencing, but also it'll be life supporting and helpful for everybody around you as well, because the information comes out in a way which is digestible. This helps digestion. It means we're putting influences, we're radiating values of truth, which can be metabolized easily by the environment. And of course, the result is that our own metabolic process improves. Then it's even easier to unpack those emotional, dynamic emotional packages. Going to the heart. The heart needs to be able to speak. And for some people in the group, what we have is a blockage here for the expression of feeling, because from a very early age, that was kind of suppressed. I know we've worked on this, some things to do with early childhood in the past, but this is another, this beautiful scene from the Disney movie Pinocchio, where at the beginning of the movie, Geppetto has his little puppet and he paints the mouth on the puppet's face. And all of a sudden, his child has a voice. And the voice is what allows that individual to be more than a marionette who's simply controlled and pushed around by the environment, but it gives that individual autonomy. When you have a voice, you have autonomy. But it's not just you who has autonomy. It is you as an expression of divinity that has autonomy, because the voice apparatus produces these waves of sound. And it is the word, it is the vibration of sound that is ultimately responsible for the manifestation of creation. All the forms, all the flowers, all the microphones, they come out as a byproduct of waves of sound that are interacting in specific ways to give rise to shape and form. Sound does it because it loops back on itself. So I'm still feeling these impulses of the heart. And what I'm feeling, okay, this is good. This is good. You guys are doing this. Thank you. So what we want to talk about then are these two things. There's content and delivery. So with regards to content, we've talked in the past about and referenced this beautiful point from Maharishi that devotion is glorified love. So when we think of love, love is like the most refined form. You could say it's the most refined feeling that can come through, but when it's coupled with service, it becomes an exalted form of that. However, at the very, very deepest level of consciousness, the devotion takes on another shape, which is very precious, and that is the shape of reverence. Devotion with reverence. This is the difference between a parent acting out of devotion for a child or a child acting out of devotion for a parent. The difference is reverence. It's very powerful. It is that quality of consciousness that connects us as individuals to the great sort of sacred level of our own consciousness, which is like the loving parent. It is the loving parent, and I'm kind of talking in sort of archetypal forms right now, but it is that loving parent form, which is that aspect of each person's consciousness which has the capability to solve problems, right? I mean, this is the first person who solves problems. When we're in these little bodies and they first arrive and they can't do anything, who solves the problems? Mom and dad solve the problems. So reverence connects the individuality or the conscious mind. We could say the conscious mind and personality with the level of self which is capable. This is communicating directly to the heart level of self. And the reason that a process is taking place here is because even though everybody knows what reverence is, there are some very long established old habits of not treating oneself reverently. I'm just looking at it. And I'm looking for trigger points. Like, are there certain kinds of situations where one is a little bit less reverent with oneself than others, like that? There's something to do with dignity. I'm digging in. I'm following a thread right now. So, one of the principles here is one of the reasons that we don't automatically treat ourselves with the same level of reverence that we would treat, say, a beloved teacher, is that with ourselves there's an intimacy, right? Like, we know what we look like without our clothes on, right? So that's like something that you probably in a lifetime you may never know that of a teacher, but you would know that with yourself. So there's somehow this element here of being extra revealed, extra self-revealed, and seeing, continuing to follow the thread, seeing that within each of us we know our greatest strengths, but we also know our greatest weaknesses. And we also know our potential to be wonderful, great, loving, giving people, which is what most of us spend our lives completely dedicated to. But we also know that within each person there's that potential to also not be wonderful, but to make mistakes. Or there's a potential for mistakes, there's a potential for behavior which is not life supporting. Everybody has both potentials. We are complete. We are complete as human beings, and this is what we're dealing with here on Earth. On Earth, it's not like that in all places, and that kind of brings me to one question that came in. So I'll look at that in just a minute. But on Earth, we're in a world where the potential to make unkind decisions is just as accessible as the potential to make kind decisions. The finer levels of creation is not so. The finer levels of creation, at some finer levels of creation, it is so. I see. And we have even historical references here to individuals who did tapas for centuries and centuries and centuries, and gained tremendous spiritual power, but did not use it for the sake of the well-being of everyone. So I guess that's a thing. And the thing is, before I answer this question, because we need to resolve this, because it's in a way there's kind of a paradox there, how could a person do that? And what it means is that that potential to not say or do the right thing, or to not act in a way which is life-supporting to others, is itself a kind of a force of understanding, you could say, which shows each person. It's like the carrot and the stick, basically. Okay, it's like the carrot and the stick. That potential to not do the right thing is like the stick, and it shows you what you want to move away from. And then the carrot is the side where you see your potential to actually do good. And when we're talking about a meta system for dealing with all problems, one of the most fundamental principles is that the earlier you can catch a problem, the more effortless it is to deal with that problem. So the idea here is, if you've got just the carrot, then, and as we're going along the path of evolution, attachments to anything in the relative, any carrots, attachments to carrots, they have less and less grip on the consciousness. So the value of having the carrot and the stick is that helps kind of guide, it helps guide decision making and guide sort of the flow of consciousness. Because there does come a point where being is so big, and it's so unbounded, and it's so compellingly beautiful and attractive. There aren't any carrots in the field of the relative which really can grab a person and draw them. There aren't. How many people have thought, I wouldn't pay $1 million. I wouldn't take $1 million or $1 billion to give up my ability to transcend, right? Like there's no price you can put on that experience, because it's just like too valuable. So the stick the stick has its value, because it not only helps increase a person's enthusiasm and passion, but it also acts as a gauge so that we can catch things earlier. The earlier we catch a problem, the easier it's going to be to unravel that problem. And doing that in small ways and setting up the systems, and that's what we really need to do in this session, is set up some systems so that problems get handled gracefully, even basically before they arise. Oh, so I'm just feeling the waves of intelligence and creativity kind of coursing through the group. And right now I'm feeling the collective of this webinar as a very sort of tightly knit, very coherent, organized, and maybe that's because of this orderliness matrix that came in at the beginning of the session, but it's a very orderly structure that we have going here. And through that orderly structure is an impulse of clarity. That's what I'm seeing. Now, I want to answer the question about worlds, so maybe I'll do that, but then I would like to launch into another point that has to do with structure. So the question is there life on every planet in every solar system that is suited to each planet? And what she means by that is she understands that the planets themselves are living beings, but the question is there kind of more like it is on Earth, like specific life forms on every planet? And it's definitely, that is a definite yes by my experience. From my looking into the various locations in creation, what I see is that, and I've got a beautiful quote about this. I guess I could share, maybe asking my husband, Tom, can you make a note that we should send the quote about the different levels of worlds in creation? It's very beautiful, and it's, basically all the worlds are comprised of the elements, earth, water, fire, air, and space. And we have, just I think in this group, people can probably think of examples of planets that are, obviously the sun is made of fire, and there's a moon of Jupiter that's just a big water. It's just a big ball of water out there. And, there are all these different worlds. Jupiter is an air planet, right? And definitely on each of these planets, there are individuals, they're structures of individuality that are also made of those elements. So just as the planets can be made of different elements, so the beings that reside on the planets can be made of different elements. And of course, even in our experience here on Earth, all the time we're surrounded by life, like the air is full of life, the clouds, the sky, the light that penetrates our planet is itself a kind of a life force. So we're surrounded by beings of all different degrees of density. And just because our bodies are mostly earthy bodies, it doesn't mean that there are many kinds of bodies all around that are of different degrees of density, made of different elements. Sometimes you see the air and it'll make those little swirls like that. It's a little vortex of energy like that. And that energy has a kind of orderliness in it, and that vortex is one of the universal shapes or forms of life in creation. Which brings me to the next point that I wanted to bring up about orderliness. And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot as I was preparing for this webinar, and I don't completely understand how it's going to fit in, but it kept coming over and over again. Oh, this is important, we need to talk about. So I'm just going to bring it up, and I am trusting all of you that you have the quality of consciousness it'll help I'll knit everything together, which it always does. It's very fun and exciting for me to watch that. So thank you. And that is that at a very fine level of creation, at the very, very, like we can say almost very much before manifested reality emerges, there is a natural flow of that source of creation energy, which is silent, collapsing to a point of dynamism. And then that point collapses to infinite silence. Infinite silence collapses to infinite dynamism. Infinite dynamism collapses to infinite silence. And there's a flow that goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And we also see that same pattern, like a fractal in form. We see that's at like a sort of before anything ever manifests level, that back and forth creates the hum that gives rise to the seed of creation. We could call the seed of creation, the Prachetana levels, the seed of creation. But because the seed is a certain, because this form is a certain shape and it's behind the whole manifested creation, we also see it in the manifested level of creation. So what we see, what we experience of ourselves within this range of manifested self is that the field of infinite, pure, unbounded, unmanifest being, which is expanding in every direction simultaneously, collapses into the point of manifested self. So our physiologies are like these, in proportion or in relationship to the rest of the universe. Our physiologies are these little teeny tiny little points of reference in the great big universe. So there's this infinity that collapses to its many antennas, right? But the universe, the manifested universe, is this great big huge incredible glorious art form, which itself is expressing that infinite silence. I mean, all it is a commentary basically on the infinite silence. So that there's also a kind of expansion contraction form that's happening there where infinity collapses to a point, and then all the points taken together are the commentary on infinity. And so there are these forms that are created by that. There's a form that goes, I'm using my screen as a diagram place. There's a form that goes this way, and then there's another form that goes this way. And this is important because these forms work together. The point of togetherness is when, I have to say one more thing about these forms. That within these forms, there's the looping, the folding in of consciousness in on itself. That one that I was talking about, the infinite silence collapses to infinite dynamism, which collapses to infinite silence and back and forth. That looping thing that happens is in this form. So it's not like a two-dimensional form, it's like a three-dimensional form that's like a spiral. Think of it like a spiral or something that's got these loops that are going in like that, right? So you've got the loops like that. So what that means is that there are frequencies at different points. And it's interesting, as a musician, it happens to be, I look to my instruments, it happens to be that when you have a looping of air like this, the further the air travels before it finishes, before it closes to a point, the deeper or lower the resonation is. So if you have a great big resonating space like a tuba, you notice they're curled around each other, but they're kind of shaped with a big bell, and then it comes down to a finer, bore where the mouthpiece is. Then it makes a big, deep resonation. And so the further the resonation moves or travels, the deeper the tone. So when the loops are big up at the top, it's very deep tones. And when they get down to the point, it's a very, you see my finger down here? It's a very fine tone. It's a very fine tone. And the big infinity of silence down here is a great, big, deep tone. And as it works its way up to the physiology, each little physiology is a point. However, there's a place in the middle where they meet. Does that make sense? If the resonations could be numbered, like mathematically numbered, so you have, very tiny numbers up, you have tiny numbers in the points, and you have big numbers at the big areas. There's going to be a place in the middle where the flow, which is collapsing from the absolute to the relative, meets the flow that's collapsing from the relative to the absolute, and they're exactly the same at the same time. And that point is a really key location in the field of manifestation. And it's, of course, obviously it's right in the middle, which means, according to our roadmap that we've been talking about, it's exactly halfway between the dense levels of the physiology and the subtle levels of the physiology. And that's no surprise, right? Because that's the point where we experience ourselves from being bound in space-time to being infinite and unbound in space-time. That's that point right there. But it also is a very important, getting back to the lexicon of the universe, it's also an extremely important key point in the communication process, because we can think of this form where these two like vortex type of shapes meet each other. That middle point is where the impulse of intelligence or intention is inserted into the system of self in order to touch both directions at the same time, in order to resonate to both directions at the same time. It's interesting. It's interesting. It brings up a lot of really interesting considerations. For example, what if I introduce an intention, but not at that point? We can call this point, by the way, the point of finest feeling, okay? Because this is the emotional body, and right at the deepest level of the emotional body, just before you get into infinite levels of physiology, is the deepest level of feeling. Anyway, so what if I introduce an intention up here? What if I introduce an intention up at some higher, denser level of self? Then I get a shape like this. I get a shape because I've introduced it a key spot. But what's going to happen is it's going to be not 50-50. And so the collapsing energy and the expanding energy aren't going to be balanced. They're not going to be balanced. I'm getting a download of information and offering this download to everybody at the same time. It's almost like it's reminding me of the sort of paradoxes that come up when you start trying to actually think about time travel or infinite universes or something. I've had these long conversations with my middle son about the impossibility of infinite universes. And he can describe me exactly logically why there is no way, it is impossible that there are infinite universes. And yet, after all that logic, we keep coming back to the fact that there still are. It's a paradox. Paradoxes are wonderful because they're like the doorways through which knowledge flows. They're they're like the carrot and the stick in a way, that lead us to go deeper and to understand more thoroughly the nature of reality. I'm just taking in the download and offering it to the field of infinite silence. Questions coming up. Can you please use a specific example in a health issue, relationship problem, etc.? So to help me understand what you were talking about. Thank you. Oh, thank you. The lady who asked this is really brilliant, and I just like to say to you, the lady who asked this question, that I really, really, really appreciate the fact that you ask these particular kinds of, this isn't the first time you've asked these questions, and I really appreciate it. So, while that download's coming in, let's see if we can find the example. So we're talking about the collapse of infinity to a point and point to infinity, and that they overlap in the middle, where they're both resonating at the exact same frequency at the exact same time. Yes. Well, let's see. She wants the answer in terms of solving a problem, doesn't she? For example, okay, thank you. Let's do that. For the example, increasing financial affluence. Beautiful. All right, so in the case of increasing financial affluence, what we have is there are patterns in the subconscious, unconscious levels of the mind which react when things happen, like having to pay a bill, for example. And they're different. Everybody's different. Now, a millionaire might have $100 debt that he has to pay. And when he pays it, it's almost pleasurable. When a person has, huge affluence, actually paying people well for services rendered is a pleasure. It's just a pleasure. It carries no pinch with it whatsoever. And if a person's very, very poor, obviously the opposite, that even having to pay a little bit, just paying just for your basic needs, can be a pinch. And so what happens is when that experience repeats itself over and over and over again, it creates a habit in the system of having that emotional reaction every time that particular action takes place. So the individual who is already affluent, then even if they become a little bit less affluent, they've evolved these habits in the system of feeling a kind of a joyous reaction when the money goes out, and feeling unattached when the money comes in. Because for a person who's very wealthy, it doesn't mean that much, right? If a person's a multimillionaire and they get $10,000, it's like, oh, okay. My accountants will take care of that. I'm not really paying a lot of attention to that $10,000 one way or the other. But for a person who's got these habits established in the system of being kind of destitute and thinking like poverty consciousness, even when the money comes in, it's never enough. There's always that feeling, like a little edge of resentment. Oh, I just got $1,000. Well, that's too bad. That really isn't quite enough. So these reactions are what we transmit in the the reactions are part of the flow that goes from, that goes from the point of individuality, because the body's like a little point in creation, and it radiates out to the whole universe. And it radiates back to the source of creation. And the source of creation responds with a solution. But when the habits are deeply enmeshed in the deep levels, in the subconscious, unconscious levels of the mind, which are getting us down into the feeling level, it's that feeling, it's never enough. The feeling sits right in this gap. These feelings that sit in this gap are more powerful. They have a more powerful influence on the whole manifesting process than a feeling that's produced or an impulse that's produced just from a thought level. So what we're doing is realizing that up here at the denser levels of the physiology, there are beliefs and habits that support that feeling being stuck there. The stuck feeling of not enough, it's never enough. And just paying for my basic needs is just painful. Those feelings, they get stuck right there. And they have a more powerful influence. So how do we unstick them? They're held in with the loops that are coming from the denser and subtler levels from creation are like threads, or they're like a fabric that sticks certain patterns into the system. And so the download that came in, and I think this isn't just the most recent, but the one right before it, was a quality. It was that intelligence, that clarity intelligence. The clarity intelligence. Very light, very sort of working with the same level of delicacy or tenderness as the feeling at the deepest level of the emotional body, okay? And so it's able to work its way in, and it's this light energy is, and when I say light, I don't mean like a light bulb light, even though there is a quality there like that, but I mean it's very sort of nonchalant almost, but that's not quite the right word either. It's very unattached. It sees in a very broad spectrum, and it can go in and it can undo all the little threads, the beliefs, the habits. This is what's happening at the denser levels of the physiology. Some of these loops that are responsible for how that middle resonation functions, those loops are being restructured according to this quality of light orderliness, like a tidy house. Like a tidy house. Getting everything sorted out, unpacking those emotional packages which are not serving the purpose of financial affluence. You have to unpack them. So as those unpack, right now they're unpacking. What this does is it opens the potential of the deeper levels, like the subconscious, unconscious levels of the mind, the areas of thinking and feeling that we normally consider to be kind of like outside the range of our control. It restructures them intentionally so that they are functioning the way a millionaire would function. Less attachment. The mind wants to grip outcomes. And when it grips outcomes, it makes the opportunity for the outcome to exceed one's expectations impossible. The mind is too grippy. These are old habits. They're old habits, and there are pain bodies connected to the old habits of feeling somehow at home with those feelings of desperation. And that's the stick. That is the stick. And it's not to say that anybody's wrong because they have that experience, because it's not wrong. You know, we are humans living on Earth. So we have both that carrot and stick side of our beings. And that's the beauty of being in the human form. That is the beauty of divinity experiencing itself through the human physiology, is that it has the potential for the whole range of human experience. And as we go through human experience, every one of those turns to become a deeper integration of divinity in what we know to be self. Restructuring self-definition. Self-definition. Okay, so here, and thank you for this question. I'm still going on this brilliant question here. When an individual has self-defined, well, I'm not a millionaire. Well, I'm not a rich person. I'm a poor person. Self-defined. I'm a poor person. Well, there's a whole layer of baggage that goes along with I'm a poor person. And that includes, you know, I have to work really hard for every penny I get, and every penny I get is never enough. And when I have to pay out, I have to pay so much money. You know, I have to pay more than I have, and so forth. All that material is in there as it's wrapped up in the self-definition of being poor. That self-definition sits at the junction, because right there is where we cut the line. That's right where the transition is between myself as a field of infinite potential, like there's nothing I cannot accomplish, and myself bound in space and time. So that's right there where that self-definition sits. And that, as I mentioned before, is an extremely powerful spot. So the principle here is that we have choices, whether we self-define based on points of reference in the relative. I made this cup. I'm a potter. I didn't make that cup. But it doesn't go with my background, so I'm keeping it over here. No, I'm not a potter. I never make pottery anymore. It's okay. Who made that cup? Did I make that cup? I did not make that cup, you guys. Okay, these hands were responsible for this thing right here. But when I made this cup, I did not experience that Dorothy made a cup. What I experienced was Dorothy's consciousness was swimming around, was playing. It was playing in the field of being. And boy, was that fun. I had fun making this cup. And it just took a few minutes too. It took me like 10 minutes. And now the rest of my life, I have this beautiful thing. So the point is that my experience when the cup was emerging from these hands was not that I was making the cup. It was that being was playing. And let me tell you, one of the most luscious things to do ever is to get your hands in wet clay. It just feels so good. It's so cool and wet and gooey. And when being starts to move through all this deep energy, it moves through the hand chakras and it moves out the points of the fingers and it interacts with that clay, and the clay is so yielding. Then what happens is being has found it's found a venue, it's found a window. It's found a window into a pure, it's a pure collective collection of elements, because the clay is just water and earth and a little bit of air mixed in there, and then you put it in the fire, so it's working. Being is getting in and getting dirty and working with the elements in a very simple way, in their simplest. It's like reducing the complex to simplicity. That which is complex, the relative, is being reduced to its simpler forms. or that which is complex, the ability of the mind to understand being, gets reduced to simple forms. And it's just a little kid in the sandbox playing with mud. That's the experience. And the experience is that this force of being is coming through. So this is the experience with getting back to financial affluence, because it's a more, for us adults, it's a more important issue anyway, is that anytime one is engaged in the process of performing action for the sake of bringing in money or bringing in affluence, that the experience is, I'm not bringing in the money, I'm not bringing in the affluence. Being, I am playing. I am playing in the field of being. And I'm doing this thing. I'm engaging in this activity or in this behavior, which is just luscious. It's just luscious. And being loves to get in and get muddy and get dirty and to engage in different activities, even if that means putting yourself out there with people that are, there's one lady on the course on the webinar tonight who works with people who are disturbed. She works, she's an emergency nurse. She's an emergency nurse. And that's some of us would feel that's a very stressful place to work. But she's so suited to that position that for her, it's almost like play. She's just there with the people and she knows what to do, and it's so fulfilling. And then whatever money comes, it comes. But money can often come from surprising, unusual places. We open up that sense of the money coming from everywhere. It comes from the whole field of life around. Not just, I did this one thing for this many hours and I got this many dollars. Some of the money we get comes through those channels. But the reality is that the wealth that comes, it comes through the entire creation is manifesting unbelievable. It's unbelievable the level of comfort that we live in this country and in this Western world. And we can point fingers that this is wrong with it and that is wrong with it. But the reality is, if we look back, I was just looking back today about 100 years back. I was looking about 100 years back and looking into the way people treated their children 100 years ago. And let me tell you, it is a different world right now. People are so much more, there's so much deeper understanding of kindness and respect. And of course, there's a range, there's always a range, and some people are nice to their kids and some people aren't as nice to their kids and so forth. But overall, parenting theories and the way most parents, the average, what's considered like socially acceptable. For example, on the Iowa books, I think it was about 30 years ago, the Iowa legislators took a law off the Iowa books that you can't hit your wife with anything bigger than a broom handle. That was a law. You see what I'm saying? It's like back then they had to make a law for that because people did that. Okay, we're not saying that there aren't still people that abuse their wives now. That does happen sometimes, but it doesn't have to be a law on the Iowa books anymore because people just understand it. It's the same. We treat ourselves with reverence and dignity. We do not call ourselves poor people anymore. You are divinity manifesting in the relative. And when divinity manifests in the relative, divinity has access to all knowledge. I know that sounds abstract. I know it sounds abstract. But the thing is, we've got to start somewhere. Even if it means starting at an abstract level and letting that little abstract seed grow and become more manifest and more dense and start drawing in shapes and forms and structures from the environment to kind of pad it up until it gets all the way up to the dense relative level of creation. And the thing that you're doing that is so delightful and feels just like playing becomes the thing that brings in income, becomes also the channel by which you are deeply, deeply appreciated. Your heart. The heart opens, and that sense of self-reverence and self-dignity. So, okay, even if I am poor, even if I'm poor, I can, I've got water in my sink. I can keep my clothes clean. Maybe I'm too poor to have a wash machine, but I can at least, I can dress this being in dignity. I can dress the being and address the being with dignity. Dress and address with dignity. The reverence is the key. And I know, I feel as if, as usual, we're coming now to the end of our session, but I wanted to say that I personally went through a lot of very interesting changes over the last 2 weeks. I would say more than I ever have before. And I knew that these changes were part of my preparation for this webinar. And I feel as if a lot of it came out tonight, which is good. And we did some healings, but as usual, Friday's session wasn't as dense with healings. Usually the Friday session is more like laying foundations, and then the Saturday session is dense with healings. So I'm guessing that tomorrow it will be even more, we will take off from where we've ended tonight and go into more work with regards to empowering everyone in this webinar with the capabilities required to activate this sort of metastructure for disallowing problems, for catching problems very, very early in their inception and eliminating the problem or solving the problem and finding the solutions that bring in maximum integration of divinity, because that's why the problems are there. They're coming up to say, this is an area that isn't functioning in an integrated manner with being. It's not expressing totality. So, we're going to continue working with this, because in the end, first I would like to say, in the beginning of the end, I would like to say that one of my greatest joys with these webinars and with the energy work that has been going on now for some time is I am really, really enjoying reports from all the people who've been participating with me here of their amazing increased capacity to heal themselves and to heal others. And for this, I bow down to each of you for this capacity which is growing in each of you. And for some of you, it's becoming quite fantastic. And you are becoming centers of the radiant healing for the world. And I just want you to know that it blows my mind. It's incredible. And it's beautiful. And it's definitely what I wish for every single person in these sessions, is that as we keep going, everybody just becomes more proficient and more proficient and more proficient in harnessing up their healing potential, their problem-solving potential, and really creating exactly this level of life experience that is so deeply fulfilling and allows divine being to completely immerse itself in your body and in your life and in every aspect of your being. So thank you very much, everyone, for being with me. It was a delight, as always. And I'm going to end the meeting, but I'm looking forward to connecting up with everyone again tomorrow morning, even though I know some will be with me in real time, some won't. Everyone will get the recordings. So I look forward to sharing that with all of you. Thank you.